Welcome to the Mockingcast, the podcast of Mockingbird Ministries. I'm RJ Heyman, your host. In just a few moments, I'll be joined by my co-hosts, Sarah Condon and David Zoll. We come to you every other Friday to explore a few of the places where we currently see grace and its absence or opposite, playing out in unexpected and compelling ways. Glad to have you with us.
Okay, welcome back to the Mockingcast, episode number 2 of our sort of new era of broadcasting, podcasting, whatever you call it. It is December 14th, and we are getting ever closer to Christmas. And I don't know about you guys, but right here where I am in Charlottesville, it is really beginning to look a lot that way. How is it in Houston?
We had snow last week. It was nuts. It was Thursday night, went outside, there were flurries. I'm like, there's no way this is going to stick. Went to bed, got up Friday morning. There were 2 inches of snow on the ground. Our backyard was covered. My 13-year-old, 15-year-old came down, could not believe it. Got the 15-month-old out in the snow for the first time. He didn't quite know what to make of it. But Christmas in Houston, praise God, it was amazing.
Wow. I know what you guys need right now is a little bit more time off school.
Yes, we do. My kids would love that.
Yeah, oh my gosh. As soon as I saw that, I mean, everyone else is like, it's going to snow. And I was like, for the love of all that is holy, please do not cancel school tomorrow. I mean, I just assumed there'd at least be a delay.
You're such a Grinch, Sarah. I love snow days. Come on. Where's the little girl in you?
That is because you are from Connecticut and I'm from Mississippi. And I'm like, nope. It's cold.
You fear the snow.
Yeah.
Sarah, you were at school, though, the other day, weren't you? You sent me some stuff that made me cry, basically.
Oh, so I got to go to our neighborhood school where my son is in first grade and read to them. I was tasked with talking to them about what it is like to be a published author, which was awesome. But obviously, I can't read from my book, Churchy, The Real Life Adventures of a Wife, Mom, and Priest, because I don't need to complain about the boss that made me wear pantyhose when I worked at the hospital to a room full of first graders. So I couldn't read that, but I could read The Very Persistent Pirate. I actually said to them, I talked a little bit about, my publishing company, Mockingbird, and it's public school. So I did that carefully. Mm-hmm. But then I said, and can you believe we've only published books for adults and we've never published a book for a kid? And they were like, what? And then I was like, it's this one. So I got to read The Very Persistent Pirate to them, and they had the funniest questions about what it's like to write, and they wanted to know all about the pirate, and they thought the word booty, which, means treasure, was hysterical. It was really awesome. It was awesome.
I still laugh at booty anytime I read it.
they loved it, man. They ate it up. And then the best part is that Mockingbird was able to donate 125 copies of The Very Persistent Pirate to the kids at that school because we're in a neighborhood that got hit really hard by the hurricane. A lot of our kids lost their entire libraries. And Dave, I haven't told you this, but it was hard to go through the thank you notes because I know some of those kids really well, and I know the ones that lost everything, and just the sweetest notes that they wrote us. So it was very powerful.
Oh gosh. I mean, I shared it with CJ and Maddie, who wrote the book, and they were just beyond touched, and it looked just glorious. It's kind of why we do what we do, I guess.
It was awesome. My favorite moment was when they asked me what my editor's name was, and I said his name is David, and they all freaked out because they all knew a David. It was awesome. I was like, could be the same guy. I don't know, guys. Man. Yeah, it was awesome.
The enthusiasm of kids is so great.
Yeah, that's a good thing when you can get excited because you know someone who has that same name. I mean, that's
incredible,
beautiful thing.
I don't ever get that, Sarah. No one ever knows someone with my name. No, there's no Rutgerians out there. I know Rutgerian. Oh my gosh, yes. I know a guy.
Well, Star Wars, of course, comes out tonight, really, in most places. And tomorrow, I've got tickets to see it both tomorrow and Saturday because I'm that kind of person. But actually, one of them is for a kid's birthday party, and I did not want to see it for the first time with a bunch of 7-year-old. You guys going?
Yeah, actually, we have. Hopefully, my kids are not going to listen to this podcast. I bought us tickets to like one of those upscale movie theaters with like the reclining seats and the pillows and the seat side service, and it was not cheap, man. It was like over $100 for the 4 tickets, but totally worth it. I mean, 'cause they have no idea it's going to be a surprise. They think we're going to see Zoo Lights or something. They're like, we've been to Zoo Lights 4 times. Like, well, 5th time's a charm. Too bad, kids. But my biggest fear is my wife's going to fall asleep, which I'm pretty sure is going to happen. So I'm getting prepared.
It's 152 minutes long. Sarah, do you guys have plans to see this movie?
No, that's not my vibe, guys. But I would definitely.
So good.
I would definitely take a good solid mom nap if my husband were taking
my wife's going to come out very well rested. Very well rested.
Awesome. I took the best nap during Captain Underpants. It's awesome.
It happens all the time. We went to see Inside Out, right? She falls asleep 5 minutes in. She wakes up right at the end. I'm bawling like in the seat next to her. She's like, what is wrong with you? Like, get your act together. My sons are making fun of me. Right. And then a few months later, we watched it at home and I have to mop her up off the floor. And she's like, I understand now. I get it. I'm like, yeah, you do. Don't mock the husband. Don't fall asleep in the movie theater. Wasted $15 on you.
I mean, it's like your kids are captive. It's dark. You're really comfortable. It doesn't matter what time of day it is.
And we've got a 15-month-old. There's no limit to the amount of sleep we both need right now. So yeah, any opportunity.
I started dozing in Coco the other day, and it was a good movie too. And then I got reproached by Kate. She was like, "What are you doing?" I'm sorry. Anyway, the new U2 album is out. I posted a big long review of it today. U2 are one of these bands I think that everyone, especially of our generation, you can't have kind of not come into contact with them in some form or another. And everyone has an opinion about them. It's hard to talk about them without like heavily qualifying it, or you're too cool for U2, or you're obsessed, or you think that they're the most pretentious people on earth. I happen to be a big fan. I've always been a big fan. My dad took me to see the Europa tour when we were living in Europe as a kid, and it was just a real watershed for me. But do you guys have any affection for U2? Do you like Bono? Do you not like him? Christians have an even more complicated relationship here, I think, because they've become like the banner wavers, or they're not Christian enough.
I love U2. Joshua Tree is one of the first albums I ever bought in 1986 or 7, whenever it won the Grammy, and I just wore that CD out. And then I remember Achtung Baby coming out and being so excited, and that opening, gritty Brian Eno guitar riff, just being like, what the heck is this? I was so disappointed and kind of angry about it. And then, of course, Achtung Baby is an incredible album and loved it. And my wife actually got me tickets to go see them here live in Houston a few months back. She ended up actually not being able to come because our baby got sick, of course. So I took my 15-year-old son and we had a great time. Although I will say early on, he's like, I've never seen so many old white people together in one place. And I was like, you shut your mouth. And
you're like, except church.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Ooh. But it was powerful. I mean, I guess it's the second or third time I'd seen them. I actually, my first real girlfriend in high school when I was a sophomore, I took to a U2 concert, like the Zoo TV tour, and we swung to With or Without You. It was a moment. But it was still powerful, man. I like Bono because I really do think at the end of the day, those guys, they understand the gospel. They really do. Like, they understand sin. They understand grace. As Bono said, grace travels outside of karma. And if karma is the truth, none of us have any hope, including him. But he's hoping that grace is the answer, that there's a God out there who's going to forgive him. And then beyond that, I think they really understand the theology of the cross. At this contemporary service we have at St. Martin's called The Altar, the band sometimes plays Yahweh for the offertory song, which is just such a powerful poem about the theology of the cross. Always pain before the child is born, that there's something about the way that God works, that it's darkest before the dawn, and kind of have to reach a place of hopelessness. And man, at the end of that song, when he sings, take this heart and make it break, I have to sort of fight it back a little bit because I feel like him. Like, my mouth is quick to criticize, and I'm lazy and sinful and degenerate. And just, I pray that God would take me and do something with me that only he can do, that I can't do myself. And so he's a bit insufferable, and those glasses are ridiculous, and his haircuts through the years, geez Louise. But he's kept it real for like 4 decades. They've been doing this thing. And at the end of the day, you gotta think it's kind of genuine, especially when you see the people he spent time with. And He was just as comfortable with like Nelson Mandela as he was with Jesse Helms,
Mhm.
which in and of itself is a statement, I think, of his, I don't know, his understanding of the gospel. So I'm a fan, as it were.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love U2. I think they're great. Yeah, I think they're awesome. When I was a freshman in high school, my best friend's brother was a freshman at Samford, not Stanford, Samford in Birmingham. And U2 played there. Her dad, oh, I'm remembering this now. So I wrote about her in my book. So her dad had just died that year, very suddenly. And he paid for us to come to Birmingham, and he and his girlfriend took us to see U2, and that would have been their beautiful day, that sort of era. And it was an incredibly, the word healing is probably really strong, but I fully understood and still understand why people have such a religious experience when they go to this concerts. Like, it was just really incredible and very special. So yeah, I'm a big fan.
The new record, when you guys get some time for it, it's better than the last one, and it's not perfect, but it's got a string of songs on the second half of it that are just unbelievable. And just in my opinion so far, and maybe I'll regret this one day, but they're up there with some of their classics. And there's a song called Landlady, which is about God, and clearly about God. I mean, he's been playing with the feminine and God since, mysterious ways. I mean, he's been doing that forever. It is such a powerful portrait of grace and theology of the cross and assurance, in fact. And it's also really beautiful. There's nothing that feels forced about it, which hasn't always been true of their music. I highly commend it to you. But the album ends with a song called 13, which is actually not only the 13th track, but it's referencing Psalm 13 about, Lord, put light to my eyes. And there's all this light coming, darkness gathering around the light, that there is a light that we can't always see. And his prayer is sort of, don't let it go out. And for me at Advent, I wonder if they timed it that way, because I think that they went back and worked on some of the songs after Brexit or after the election. And I could tell where they did that. I'm not sure it was the right move, but they don't consult me when they do these things. But it's there's some great stuff about Syria, and he always loves to sort of preach to America in a kind of affectionate way, but that stuff kind of falls. America as an idea usually falls flat with me personally. But when Bono gets into the soul of it, which is what he does on Landlady and the Little Things That Give You Away, which is really a dark night of the soul, and then 13 and love is bigger than anything in its way. I mean, the chorus of that last one, which is such a slogan, you're like, oh, you roll your eyes, Bono, come on, love is bigger than anything in its way. But the chorus is actually, if I could only hear myself when I say love is bigger than anything in its way. And it's what he's trying to convey to his children. And it is this Easter morning song that is just anthemic in all the right ways, even though the critics sort of say it sounds like Coldplay, but of course Coldplay sound like you too.
Right. Oh, seriously.
Yeah.
And who even cares who cares who they're sounding like? They're so much themselves, and it matters whether the song works or not. And I feel like the song works extremely well. So I commend it to you and to our listeners. But let's actually shift gears away from U2, because we've got some slightly more serious stuff to talk about. Did you guys get a chance to watch that video of Chamath, I'm going to murder this last name, Palihapitiya, the guy who was talking to all the MBA students at Stanford? Did you get a load of this guy? He's it
was intense.
It was very intense, and it's kind of prophetic.
Way, in a great way.
Clearly a truth teller of a guy. This has been making the rounds. There's a video on YouTube with this guy Chamath, who is a venture capitalist. He's the co-owner of the Golden State Warriors, and he was instrumental in the early years of Facebook. He's yet another one of these social media executives who has forsworn their work. When the interviewer asked him about it, he says, I feel tremendous guilt. And he's talking about his role in social media. He says, we have created tools that are ripping apart the social fabric of how society works. The short-term dopamine-driven feedback loops that we have created are destroying how society works. No civil discourse, no cooperation, misinformation, mistruth. And it's not an American problem. This is not about Russian ads. This is a global problem, eroding the core foundations of how people behave sort of between each other. And he says, I don't have a solution. My solution is that I just don't use these tools anymore. And I haven't for years. I mean, he goes on to really pinpoint kind of an increasingly accepted criticism, I think. He says we curate our lives around this perceived sense of perfection because we get rewarded in these short-term signals, hearts, likes, thumbs up. And we conflate that with value and we conflate it with truth. Instead, what it is really is fake, brittle popularity that's short term that leaves you even more vacant and empty than before you did it, because it forces you into this vicious cycle about what's the next thing I need to do because I need it back. And think about that compounded by 2 billion people. And you don't realize it, but you're being programmed. It was unintentional, because speaking as someone who was there in the back rooms while these things were being developed. But now you've got to decide how much you want to give up. Now, I mean, this is something we've talked about many times in the past, but it bears repeating and revisiting ad nauseum, especially at the end of 2017, this social media toxicity that seems to be tearing the fabric, as he says. Do you guys think he's going too far? What do you do with what he says?
I'll say, Dave, it's a very present issue for me and my wife, because we have a 15-year-old and a 13-year-old, and I love them and I want to give them what they want for Christmas. And so 2 years ago, they both got iPhones, and it's been a little, I don't know. We wrestle with it because they spend a lot of time on their phones, watching YouTube videos or going through their not Instagram, but Snapchat or their feeds basically, and just reading stories. And I go back and forth because they're not hermits. They get out there, they've got friends, they have interests, they love sports and playing guitar, and they get together with their friends and play guitar. And even things like, when they play Xbox or PS4, by and large, they're playing with their friends. They're not sitting at home just doing it alone. Like, it was funny, I was talking with Josh, Sarah's husband, about him getting his first NES, Nintendo Entertainment System, because we were talking about Christmas stuff. And he said it was no social stuff. It was just me in a room alone playing Zelda. That's it. But our 13-year-old will sit upstairs and he'll be chatting with 3 or 4 friends as they're playing, World War II, Call of Duty, or Madden 18, or whatever it is. So I struggle with it. The hopeful part of me wants to believe that because it's such an integral part of their upbringing, they'll have very highly developed BS meters, and that they're not going to let it totally take over their lives. The fearful side is that Atlantic article, remember, from a few months back, about, our smartphones destroying a generation. And it's like, but I thought about, today, I remember a story my father told me once, who grew up in a small town in Holland, and whose father was a innkeeper and bartender and a little bit of a farmer. And his dad used to tell him not to read books because it was going to make him want things. Mm-hmm. And so I'm always a little skeptical. Like, the things we call classics now in the 21st century were Pulp Fiction. And Jules Verne was destroying kids' minds in the 1850s or whatever. So I go back and forth. We're struggling with it, to be honest. I sort of want to make them watch that video and be like, what do you guys think? And they're just going to roll their eyes and be like, this is absurd. So that's where I'm at.
The world they live in.
Yeah. I mean, I'm on social media a ton. I don't know if you guys have noticed, but
really?
Yeah, sometimes at work, sometimes, I'm just on it a lot, in the way I justify that to myself. And I definitely know that I'm on it too much, and definitely justify it to myself, is that I'm like, well, it kind of helps me to see different things I can write about. And it helps me to kind of hone my writing skills on some level. I definitely think that I'm a better writer because I'm on there and I'm commenting on things and I'm writing things and I'm seeing what sort of affects people more. And so, that's the justification. But the reality of it is I find it terrifying. I find it absolutely terrifying. And I don't have teenagers. I actually think it's pretty terrifying for people our age. There was a guy who posted a question. This has been a couple months ago. He said, and I haven't written about it just because I felt like if I'd written about it immediately, he would have known I was writing about him. But he said, how can I have all these friends on here and I have this whole community on here. And I just want to know how I can go deeper with this. And he's Christian. It was like, how can this feel more contemplative, was his question, which was very strange to me. And of course, I'm so flippant. I'll just get on there and write anything, right? So I get on there and I'm like, well, none of this is real, right? Like, we're all staring at screens. You and I are not really friends, right? Like, we got that, right? And people went nuts. People who are grown, who are in their 50s were like, what are you talking about? This is totally real. And I was like, you guys are right. And then just left the conversation, because I wasn't going to get him back with him. I mean, it's fascinating to me that people will friend me on Facebook, people who I've never met, and they will think that we are friends. I'm like, we are not. When I see this stuff and sort of the fear in it is that community and the way our brains think about community has completely changed. And we're just more and more and more isolated. I'm not even worried about teenagers. I'm worried about me, I mean, that line that he wrote, like, now you've got to decide how much you want to give up.
Dun, 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 dun.
Yeah. It's like, what? So, and I mean, I feel like I've said this on here before, but I feel like there's an entire generation of small children who are just like raised with, I know our listeners can't see this, but just raised with like this, like this is mom is just the back of a cell phone. You know what I mean? It's like, hey, what? Okay. And you just peer on the cell phone and then you put the cell phone back,
Ethan highlighted something last week in the Weekender, something Nick Bilton wrote in the end of November for Vanity Fair. He said it seems increasingly likely that our society will one day view our infatuation with Twitter, Facebook, and the like as a passing, often destructive fad, talking about how opium and cocaine were used to help children with teething in the 1880s. Wow. I'm sort of, to be honest with you, RJ, I'm not on social media except for the Mockingbird Instagram. I'm still totally, addicted to it, or I understand the dopamine rush, and that's what blogging is sometimes about too. I'm hoping he's right. I'm hoping that we will sort of be, partisan or not, old, young, new, will sort of say, we did not know what we were doing, and all of the science seems to say that this is really not helping people, and it's really making things tangibly worse. But maybe that's too high of an anthropology or something like that. I don't know.
Honestly, I found Facebook to be so boring lately. So boring. I mean, I used to look at a lot more, and now I'm so tired of the endless politics. Like every so often I'll see a thoughtful conversation and I'm like, thank God. And don't get me wrong, I still check it at least every day. But I have no interest in Instagram. I'm showing my age now. I'm 41. Instagram holds no appeal for me. I'm not going to get on some other social media platform. Twitter, I'm just not. Bleh. Facebook is really the one. Kind of keep up with people you vaguely know and judge them, or feel judged by them. But it's gotten kind of boring, honestly.
Well, the sense of that what he says, that perceived sense of perfection, which is the law, as we know, or as least in theory we know. I think that's really. How to say it? I mean, I think that's really corrosive to people. I love how he concludes later on. He sort of castigates his audience and says that he doesn't want people to think they're too smart to fall for what social media does to you because they go to Stanford. He says your best and brightest are the most likely to fall for it because you've been checkboxing your entire life, going from one thing to the next. And I do find that to be deeply true. I mean, it reminded me of this other thing that we wanted to highlight about exercise, the Consumerist Church of Fitness classes written by this wonderful writer. Her name is Zan Romanoff. I'm not a big exercise class person. Sarah, you gave a talk recently at Mockingbird that was very colorful about interactions on the treadmill. Yeah. But I do know that people do this. She goes through the ways exercise classes have come to function as churches. They're providing people with community and being able to sort of get re-embodied, and that there's a ritual people go to. But what struck me was how deep it got into the psychology of what religion is actually like, or at least sort of a legalistic religion. She says the explicit promise that exercise has a spiritual component seems to elevate it to a higher purpose. Instead of focusing solely on health and the attractiveness of the body, it suggests fitness is a gateway to a much larger and more lasting state of happiness and fulfillment, much like some religious practice. The idea is that if you can find your good self, your inner self, your higher self on a bike, then you can also do it when you're out in the world. But where it really gets charged is towards the end when she says the fetishization of never-ending accomplishment, which thrives by one-upping itself, can create a perpetually striving mindset that's very good for selling class packages, but very bad for finding any kind of actual mental peace. And so the same drive that brings someone into an exercise class and keeps them attending even when they're tired and it's tough can become a liability when the challenge facing them is that they need to take a week off, when that's the actual challenge. She says, there's a great line in there about accountability, which it sounds like some of the Soul Cycle people have stolen liberally from the Bible and from youth pastors throughout the ages and country.
Thanks, youth pastors.
Hey, I love you. I was a youth pastor. So was RJ.
Yes, indeed.
Having teachers who are willing to insist on slowing students down is particularly critical because the obsession with harder and the equation of harder and better when it comes to exercise isn't just coming from within or out of the mouths of instructors. We live in a culture that fetishizes intensity as a path to purity and considers purity a form of desirable perfection. We cannot necessarily trust ourselves to know when to stop, but there is a spirituality to be found in slowing down and stopping. It's just that there's not as much profit, and so there aren't as many examples for us of how it might be done. Slowing down, Christmas season, exercise.
Yeah.
Shoot from the hip, Sarah. What do you think?
Well, it reminded me of that episode from The Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt. Did you guys ever watch that show?
I've seen the first season. I love it.
Okay, it's the second season in which this happened. So Jenna Maroney plays like the fancy Manhattanite rich wife, and she and her husband's marriage starts to fall apart. He's cheating on her. And at the same time, she becomes obsessed with SoulCycle. And so she takes Kimmy, you know, her assistant, to the SoulCycle classes. And it'll be like this really religious experience and really incredible. And they'll walk out into the locker room, and immediately Jenna Maroney will be reminded that like her husband's leaving her whole life's falling apart. She's not going to have any money. And then she goes, let's just go take another class. So they just spend all day going in and out of SoulCycle classes. I mean, I see this a ton, like among women my age. This is like a thing that everyone is doing. Everyone, I mean, you know, I was with a mom's group at our church a couple of weeks ago, and just this pressure to look good, right, gets coupled with this sort of faux spirituality. And then you can justify it. I mean, as she said, like there's no end to the justification of like, I have to go to classes. I have to go to classes. I feel like this is TMI, so I apologize in advance to the two gentlemen in the room. But when we lived in New York, and everybody was so skinny, I did what wasn't called SoulCycle, but probably is now. I went to spin classes. And we were trying to get pregnant. And the teacher like knew everything about, like she would ask us these questions, and everything was a journey and blah, blah, blah. And I was having a conversation with her one morning, and I said, you know, my husband and I were really, you know, we really want to get pregnant. It took us a while to get pregnant with our son. And she's like, oh, well, you should stop doing these classes because women typically don't ovulate when they do this much spin. And I was like, what? Like, it was like a part of the thing, you know, like, anyway, apologies for anyone that offended, but it was a weird, I mean, it was like stepping into, I mean, I don't want to say a cult, but definitely like a mindset we all had to share and agree upon. So.
Sarah, you talking about New York City. I remember just doing drop off of my kids when they were younger, when all the parents were still dropping off. And, you know, by and large, guys were headed off to work, and some women were too. But basically, there were two acceptable ways for women to show, well, actually maybe three acceptable ways for women to show up at drop off. One was, you know, dressed for work. The second was dressed to the nines, or the third was, you know, in your workout clothes, because you were going to go quote unquote work out when all you were actually going to do was go around the corner and go to the coffee shop and hang out with your friends. You know, but at least it gave you sort of an excuse to not be all dressed up. So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's a whole identity that women have now. Like, we don't just stay at home, right? Like, that's got its own weight to it, even saying it that way. But we're not just at home. Like, we're also like working out all the time. And we have this whole, you know, I mean, I have a friend who's very involved in yoga, and it's referred to as a community. I mean, I think it was Nadia Boltz-Weber who was like, who obviously is very into exercise, right? But who said something like, you know, your yoga teacher's not going to show up with a casserole when your mom dies. I mean... You know, I mean, and great if they do. I want to say great if your yoga teacher does. But when I read stuff like this, like I feel like a lot of this stuff stops at the door. I just wonder how genuine this is. I'm only nice to people because Jesus loves me, for the record. You know what I mean? Like if it were just yoga or spin class, I would not be nice to people. But like I'm only nice to people because I wake up in the morning and I'm like, oh my God, Jesus still loves me. That's crazy, you know?
Yeah.
So.
Well, it certainly plays into... It's a religion of law, that amorphous law, you know, what is your best if you've never, you know, what is your higher self, your full potential? That's a very difficult goal to have in life. It plays into our works, righteousness. And I think health is not a bad thing. I mean, who doesn't want to be healthy? Who wants to, you know, we all want to feel a little better. And the issue becomes when people are basically Sunday morning, all the gyms are packed and the churches are empty. What's going on there? And people are running to the law, I think. And I don't blame them because I do it and we all do it. But I cannot help but be grateful for a God that runs after us and actually, you know, runs. You know,
Get it?
Yeah, well, and that's probably as good a segue as we're going to have to the final piece here, which of course is the more theological one. A couple of years ago, Ethan posted this wonderful devotion from Will Willimon from that one of a book of devotions about Advent and Christmas called Watch for the Light. And he talks about Christmas. It actually plays directly into this exercise thing of wanting to achieve and to master and to progress. He says, consider what we do at Christmas, the so-called season of giving. We enjoy thinking of ourselves as basically generous, benevolent, giving people. There's one reason why everyone, even the nominally religious, love Christmas. Christmas is a season to celebrate our alleged generosity. Yet I suggest we are better givers than getters, not because we are generous people, but because we are proud, arrogant people. The Christmas story is not about how blessed it is to be givers, but about how essential it is to see ourselves as receivers. We prefer to think of ourselves as givers, powerful, competent, self-sufficient, capable people whose goodness motivates us to employ some of our power, competence, and gifts for the benefit of the less fortunate, which is a direct contradiction of the biblical account of the first Christmas. There we are portrayed not as the givers we wish we were, but as the receivers we are. This is often the way God loves us, with gifts we thought we didn't need, which transform us into people we don't necessarily want to be. With our advanced degrees, armies, government programs, material comforts, and self-fulfillment techniques, we assume that religion is about giving a little of our power in order to confirm to ourselves that we are indeed as self-sufficient as we claim. Then this stranger comes to us, blesses us with a gift, and calls us to see ourselves as we are, empty-handed recipients of a gracious God who, rather than leave us to our own devices, gave us a baby. Does this reach you in Houston?
It's striking. It is. It's because, one of the things I've been in charge of was Harvey relief for our church. And we had a lot of people, as Sarah did, who were flooded out and really just took a huge financial hit. And a lot of them are people who are used to giving and serving and being on the other side. And so people at the same time were very generous in our church. We raised some money for Harvey relief, and I had the great fortune to be able to call people and tell them they were sending some money their way, or just talking to them after they received checks. The level of gratitude, of gratefulness, of thankfulness was pretty stunning, actually. I mean, I've talked to a lot of people who were in tears and who said this exact same thing, like, I'm not used to receiving, I'm not used to being on the other side of generous giving, but they were incredibly humbled. And I can't help but think I don't know, I hate to say this, but it affected their relationship with the church, obviously, and with God. And it's been a pretty beautiful thing to be a part of.
Yeah, I mean, I read this, and the thing that kind of stuck out to me was that this is often the way God loves us, with gifts we thought we didn't need, which transform us into people we don't necessarily want to be. It's always so interesting to me that we expect things to go a different way. We expect everything to go a different way. We expected our life to go a different way. We expect our jobs to go a different way. And, fundamental to our DNA is that we expected God to be a different way. And that is just never how it works. I mean, it's like, we're at the season of Christmas parties right now. And in our own household this past week, I got an Evite to a party that had my address on it because we're hosting it and I had forgotten. And, I'm thinking about all these parties and the people that will be at it. And there's this truism in my life that has lived out over and over again. It's whoever I complain about to my husband in the car on the way there is who will sit by me at the party. Like, that is how it works. And it's just a constant reminder of, I don't know, not just humility, but like that maybe I've got something to learn. You know what I mean? Not just like, oh, I'm going to humble myself and like be with this person. And it's really important for me to like be with this person, but more like, maybe it's really important for me to know this person. I mean, my husband said to me actually the other day, he said it in the sweetest way, but he's like, maybe God's just trying to remind you how much he loves them and how much he loves you. And I was like, oh, yeah, I guess that is what's happening again, So, yeah, it's just like the whole season feels that way right now. But
I honestly, where my mind is sort of the end of the year and having run a nonprofit and churches needing to do pledge campaigns and raising money, which is an uncomfortable place to be. You can spiritualize it all you want, but it's uncomfortable. I do think it's uncomfortable in a good way. Every year here at the church, we have these fellows who are wonderful kids right out of college, and they're mostly coming from quite affluent backgrounds and ready to do some service for the year. And we require them to raise a little bit of money. I mean, $5,000 or something like that. And you watch as they do sort of cartwheels to avoid it. and they procrastinate. And the reason they do it is not necessarily because they don't have the addresses or they don't think it's going to come in, but because it's so difficult to put yourself out there like that.
Mm.
When we were youth ministers, RJ and I had to raise our own support.
Mm-hmm.
And once Mockingbird, we raised, a huge amount of our budget from wonderful donors and supporters, but that's more for the organization. I no longer have to say David Zoll needs this money, even though maybe that's how it comes across sometimes. But it was such a relief to be off of the, putting my hands out. But spiritually, if we really believe what we say, that's who we are. In fact, it is more blessed to receive. That's what we're doing when we're at the communion rail. We are all on the same level, rich, poor, whatever political persuasion, whoever you are. And I think that that's a reminder that is actually, it's hard when things are going well and when you've been programmed to have it together. But then when life falls apart, and we've watched in our community here as a couple of lives have dramatically fallen apart, and people who would never have had to ask for anything are having to ask for a lot. And what you see is how the joy and the gratitude and how close they feel to God in a way that they've never done before. They would never have chosen it. They've tried to resist it with every ounce of their strength. And yet here they are having to receive for their survival. You see the baby, you see the manger, you see it all play out in front of your eyes. And it's such a gift to receive that even by proxy. That's what I think, because you can't talk about this necessarily without thinking about finances.
It's where we put all our security, all of our hope, all of our security, all of our sense of allows us to get through the day. And, as someone who's been through times in my life where things just totally kind of fell apart, to sort of get to the other side of that and be like, oh, yeah, maybe there actually is a God who cares about me,
Yeah.
who's not necessarily all that interested in my plans, or what I think is best or what I want, but actually sort of knows better than I do and actually knows what he's doing and is in control. And of course, that was a number of years ago and I forget it all the time, because as soon as control is wrested from my cold, dead hand, to quote Charlton Heston, I take it as soon as I possibly can. I take it back up again. And as I take it up, I take up all the accountability, the anxiety, the fear that comes with it. But hopefully there are moments again where I'm reminded like, oh, yeah, I don't have to live in so much fear that things aren't going to go my way, because they're going to go his way, and his way's better than my way, even if sometimes it really, really sucks.
Well, Merry Christmas to you both. I think
on that note, Merry Christmas.
No. Well, that's what we're every year at December. We get to receive this gift again together, whether or not we kind of are in the circumstances where we can. I think there's something to the liturgical year that is a little comforting in that respect.
I'll say this. I'm better this year because last year, every year at Christmas, I get super anxious and freaked out basically about how much money I'm going to spend and about like, okay, I'm going to spend this much, but I'm going to hold back this much. I'm going to save some of it. I'm not going to spend it all. And then finally last year, I said to my wife, I'm just realizing we are going to spend all the money.
Yeah.
All the money shall be spent.
Yeah.
There will be none left.
Yeah.
and we'll be okay next year.
Yeah.
And we were, And so now this year I'm like, yeah, okay. Everything must go. It's all going to go.
Right.
But there's something kind of beautiful about that. If God is willing to give himself 100%, then maybe I can as well, even though I'm like literally sweating right now. It might be because the heat just came on, but I'm literally sweating right now as I talk about it. Oh God, the money is all going to be gone. Praise God. We'll make it to next year.
Yeah, the money stuff is terrifying. I mean, last Monday, so I always find really anxious things to do at about 8 a.m. on the one day my husband officially has off, which is Mondays. So I'm always like, at 8 a.m., I'm always like, we should clean out the garage. Or I'm like, let's meal plan and go to the grocery store. So this past Monday, I was like, I've spent too much money. We should check the credit cards. And,
no.
Yeah.
What? That's the worst idea I've ever heard.
I'm an amazing wife.
My God.
So we checked the credit cards, which were actually not that bad. But sometimes I feel like I feel the weight of my DNA. Like I feel like I just have this like internal, like emaciated, Louisianian from like 1846 that's like ruling my body. And sometimes she's just like, we don't have anything, we're all gonna starve, you know, and like that kicks in like every December. And so
fight or flight.
Yeah, and there's no trust in God, right? God for her in 1846 is like only to be feared and not to be trusted because the other shoe's gonna drop, right? Somebody's about to die from diphtheria. It's happening. So yeah, it's just it was such a funny thing to call. And I was like, oh, we haven't spent nearly as much money as I thought we had. And then I'm like, oh, why am I just...
It's so early in the month. Like, don't get cocky, Sarah. It's so early.
And I had that thought too. But it's also just like, am I trying to reject the gift before it's even gotten here? Do you know what I mean? Am I trying to make this about my anxiety and my worry and what are we doing this season, blah, 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 instead of just being like, oh my word, like this thing is happening in this manger. Like this is the thing that saves me from it all. Am I going to busy myself so I don't have to acknowledge how much I need that?
Well, let's wrap it up there. I'll read the third beautiful verse of It Came Upon a Midnight Clear. Since we won't be back till after the new year, probably the first week in the new year, I'm thinking like the end of that first week. But maybe you know this is my favorite Christmas Carol verse. O ye beneath life's crushing load, whose forms are bending low, who toil along the climbing way with painful steps and slow. Look now, for glad and golden hours come swiftly on the wing. O rest beside the weary road and hear the angels sing. Pray that we all hear those angels. Thank you, guys. I will talk to you soon. Thank you, listeners. Thank you all those who are supporting Mockingbird, because we sure need it. We are so grateful to be taken care of and to get to do this for you and with you.
Thanks, Dave. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
All right, much love to you both. Merry Christmas. Bye. Thank you for listening. Remember, you can find us on the web at www.mbird.com. And we'd always love to hear from you at info@mbird.com. Audio production for the Mockingcast is provided by the Narrativo Group, and if you like what you've heard, please do drop over to iTunes and leave us a rating and review. Until next time.